Hi, everyone. I'm Dana Lauer from Project Arc. If you have listened to this before, you know what I'm going to say, so you can fast forward and get to the really good part of the conversation. If you're joining us for the first time, let's give you a little bit of an introduction about me and DIST. So, most of you know me from my work in project-based learning and really pushing into a more authentic space so that learners have that opportunity to affect real change in their world. And in fact, the ARC in Project ARC stands for authenticity, relevancy, and community connected learning. So for the past 2 decades plus, this has really been my journey and my passion. And most of the time, that journey has been rewarding, albeit bumpy at times. And so in November of 2024, so a good year and a half ago, I put out this call on LinkedIn to connect with me if you considered yourself to be disagreeable in education, because I have on occasion been labeled as being a disagreeable person, and I wear that badge proudly. But the post was actually prompted by a quote that I read in Adam Grant's book, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. So I'm going to take a moment and read that quote to you now. It says, the ideal members of a challenge network are disagreeable because they're fearless about questioning the way things have always been done and holding us accountable for thinking again. There's evidence that disagreeable people speak up more frequently, especially when leaders aren't receptive, and foster more task conflict. They give the critical feedback we might not want to hear, but need to hear. So I had absolutely no idea what DIST would turn into. And in fact, I have no idea what our two guests are going to say today, but our guests we're really excited about because they are both college students. If you were with us last month, we focused on school board member perspectives, and so now we are shifting to the consumers that really matter for us, the students. So as our conversation unfolds over the next 35 minutes or so, we hope to learn and grow from Katie and Spriha as we engage in conversation. Obviously, we don't know what they're going to say, so here's our little disclaimer. Whatever their viewpoints are doesn't necessarily constitute the viewpoints of Project ARC and an endorsement from us, but instead, Tim and I, as I said before, are really excited to learn and grow from them as we get to think again.
All right, thank you, Dana. And I am Tim Kubik, Dana's business partner at Project ARC and longtime community connected learning advocate. I'm really excited to have these two students on because this is the first time in the 18 months that we've been doing this that we've actually had the student perspective. And from the work that we've done over the years, we know how critical that is. I'm going to turn to Katie. Katie, do you want to kick us off while you've still got a good voice?
Sure. I'm Katie. I'm a civil engineering major at York College, and I'm in my sophomore year right now. Um, what do you
Yeah,
want me to start with?
yeah. Do you have a dis word that you want to share that you're thinking about with education?
Yeah, so I was thinking about the word disengaged because I feel like a lot of classes in high school and some in college are more lecture based, and it tends to make the students lose their interest because there's not very much hands-on learning going on.
Okay, so disengaged is a good one. And then Spria, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your dis word.
Hi, my name is Spriha Pokhrel. My major is computer science. I'm a second year student at Juniata College. I am originally from Nepal. At Juniata College, I'm currently involved in the Office of Digital Learning. So, the team that I work with does all things related to how to promote digital literacy on campus. We have three sort of like factions that we're divided into. We have the instructional design team. And the second one we have is the video production team, and the third one that we have is the digital literacy learning team. And in these specific teams, we're all student-based. We cross-collaborate with each other, with the target audience being students, our local Huntington community, as well as faculty in mind. So lots of things related to educational technology, what digital tools are going on, and how we can leverage them while in college, and how our different audiences can leverage them. So that's been sort of my role and how I got interested in the education side of things. In terms of my dis word, I would say would be displacement. And what I really mean by that is just the feeling of feeling out of place in a new environment, whether it is transitioning from high school to college or from college to then transitioning into the workforce. Um, my take on it is, are we really preparing students as well? Whether it is to transition from the first half from high school to college or college to the real workforce. I feel like there's some tensions and anxieties
Hmm.
that I've personally seen and experienced and heard. So that would be my initial take on the dis word.
Well, we're glad to hear that one because Displaced was a series of conversations that we actually did during the pandemic when all of us very much felt displaced from our traditional education environments. I want to get back to that one, but I want to take us forward first by drawing the contrast that Katie and Spriha have shared with us between um, a learning experience and educational ecosystem that feels very lecture oriented, where people are primarily being talked to or talked at, versus the kind of digital literacy work that Spriha talked about, where people are working together across different teams and collaborating in different ways. Um, and I'm curious, Katie, for you to go first, and I want to ask you two questions that you can play with. One is, and you don't have to name any names. Do you think it's just that you have bad lecturers, right? And keep that in mind, Spriha as well. And two, is there something more engaging about teamwork? So you can start with either one of those two questions, Katie, but and then we'll go to Spriha.
So I will say it definitely does depend on the professor. I do. I have opened my eyes to flipped lectures at college where they have you watch the lectures before
Hmm.
class and then you go into class and work on problems in groups as teams and then the professor comes around and kind of guides you as you work. And then there's also other lecturers that um include the students in on the conversation, like won't continue the problem until someone figures out the answer. So it's not like we're just watching them right on the board the entire class.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And do you think there's something more engaging about teamwork than even a really exciting lecture?
Um, I'm sorry, what was that question again?
And that's okay. I said, do you think there's something more engaging about the kind of teamwork situations that Spriha described compared to even the best lectures that you've had as a student?
Yeah, I'd say, especially from an engineering perspective, like that's going to be my entire life working in teams. And I think that it's important to build that skill of being able to collaborate because that's what you're going to have to deal with in the real world post graduation.
All right, and I love that statement that your entire life is going to be working in teams because I think you're right about that. Spriha, you're getting a little bit of taste of that, but first let me ask you the same question I asked Katie, which is, do you find all lecture a bad thing, or have you had some engaging lectures, and what made them so?
I've had a mix of both. I would say personally, I guess it depends on what the specific student's style of learning is. So
Hmm.
I do really well with a mix of a little bit of lecture followed by an activity immediately that allows me to experience whatever theory I've learned and apply it. Whereas maybe for some other people, they do really well with like just theory in itself or like watching videos. But I think this is like a recent thing that I've learned so far with my experience. I've had one class which is mostly lecture based this semester, and some at times it's really frustrating for me because I'm more used to like having the more hands-on style, and in that class I don't get any homework or projects. So
Hmm.
it's literally just going into class and listening and then trying to independently figure out how I can consolidate that information and how I can employ some of the learning strategies there. So my recent learning and recent takeaway is there's going to be like a mix of both in terms of the instructors that you get. Some instructors might have a style that is more accommodating for some students, whereas some might not. And so it's really helpful if students are able to first identify what helps them, what works for them, so that no matter what professor's class that they go into, they're able to sort of strategize and figure out ways that they can make learning work for them. A second follow-up that I would have to that is also just talking to the professor, going and having a conversation with them. I feel like that would give you a lot of idea and sense of what their sort of learning objectives for the class is, what the students are supposed to be doing. So that would be my perspective on that.
No, and that's a good point to raise, and I see Katie nodding at that. The first thing I just sort of wanted to establish is that um, lecture isn't inherently boring, right? It can be interesting, and I like Katie that you talked about. I think it was um, the flipped classroom experience, right? That watching some things rather than having to sit together as a crowd and then working through them is similar to what Spreha was talking about with like lecture and then an immediate application, right? There's an old saying in education that if you want to know who's doing the learning, look at who's doing the working, right? And if the teacher is doing all the work for 45 minutes by planning and lecturing, they're usually learning more than the students are. Um, but that doesn't mean that lecture is inherently bad. Um, I want to shift now to that question of displacement, though, because it connects to something that I think Dana and I are both really curious about, right? Is um, traditional high schools try to prepare kids for college. And at some point in your high school experience, somebody probably told you, you have to sit there and take notes and listen to this lecture so you'll be prepared for college, right? Um, or you have to do something else so you'll be prepared for college. You'll have to write um, an hour-long essay exam in class because that's what they're going to ask you to do in a humanities course in college, or a ton of problem sets, right? To what extent did you feel displaced when you went to college from the reality that teachers in high school had told you to expect? To what extent was it different than what you expected based on what your teachers told you? And either one of you can start us off on that one if you want. But because I think so often teachers think they know what they're preparing kids for, but oftentimes it's for a college experience that existed 30 years ago. So just curious about your thoughts on that one. Who'd like to kick us off? Katie, it looks like you're maybe thinking.
Um, yeah, I feel like the teachers in high school just kind of assumed that I honestly feel like they made it seem like the professors would be more strict than they are. I feel like maybe I just got lucky here, but I feel like a lot of my professors are able to adapt to the students here who are having difficulties. And what I appreciate is a lot of them do surveys too about like what kind of learning styles they prefer and things like that.
So that's interesting, right? There's this sense that the professors are going to be more strict, and you find them to be more flexible. How about you, Spreha? What was a displacement that you experienced um, based on what you were told college was going to be like in high school compared to what it actually feels like?
I think one difference that I found was during high school, there was more of like a stricter structure when it came to education. So like teachers were really like, oh, this is a deadline. This is gonna happen then. Um, I feel like it was more involved, whereas in college, there's less of that structure
Mhm.
and it's more like it helps establish more independence in a way because you also have like so many of these other factors where you're not just you're like living, at least for me, you're like living in a community, you're living in a dorm, you're learning about yourself. So there's like those personal things as well. But yeah, I definitely agree to the point of Katie where in college, it feels like the professors are more accommodating. I've personally felt like I've seen, and I'm grateful that I have professors whom I feel comfortable talking to about where I am and what my struggle points are and how I can, learn better for a specific class.
So I'm curious just to hear from both of you. Why do you think that is? Why do you think your professors are a little bit more flexible, a little bit more accommodating than maybe some of your high school teachers were? And you can make it a personal thing without naming a professor, or you can just generalize, whichever you like.
I think maybe the expectation is also now that because we're growing up, we're older, so maybe the professors have more trust in us to be able to sort of self-regulate and take care of ourselves better and to know. And I think when we're talking about like preparedness and like transitioning from like one part of life to another, there's like to me at least, I feel like there's two ways that I look at it where it's like there are a lot of things that you also learn as you go. So there's going to always be things that you can't prepare for or school or college won't be able to prepare you for,
Mhm.
but there's going to be some things where they can prepare you for as well. So I guess just finding a balance of the both.
Well, I think that the question of self-regulation is important. Katie, how about you? What do you think makes your professors a little bit more flexible than your high school teachers?
I think they're just overall more understanding. I think they know what to expect from us, and also since they've been teaching in the m more recent years in college, they know what it's like as a college experience now. Some of my high school teachers were in college when we didn't have all this technology available to us and all
Hmm.
those other things. So I think they see it from a different perspective for that reason.
Yeah,
So,
and that's starting to get a little bit into this question of distance that I know Dana was going to jump in on and thinking about the word
yeah.
distant. So Dana,
So before I jump into my Discord, Katie, I did want to ask you specifically about a portion of your high school experience that I know that you had, because you did a talk with with the school board. I think it was your senior year about the Da Vinci class that you were in, and as you think about what went on in that Da Vinci class, which was far more hands-on project problem based versus some of those more traditional lectures, right, and essay classes, and because you're in the engineering world, how has that Da Vinci experience translated into your college experience? Has it helped? Were there aspects of it that you think if they were replicated more frequently in high school that would be great? Or or was that so kind of far out there that you're not experiencing any of that yet, or maybe at all, in your engineering classes?
Yeah, so my Da Vinci class I took in high school was more of like an independent study kind of class. And I took it my junior and senior year because I loved it so much. Um, but basically, we had the freedom to work on whatever projects we wanted that interested us. And my professors would come to me, or my teachers in that class, there's three of them. They would come to me with a problem, and I would try to come up with a solution for it, whether it be I used a 3D printer to print a model of something that they need. I printed planters for an aquaponics tower, and I made projects with resin. I made a stylus holder for a disabled student so he could use his Apple Pencil and things like that. But that class taught me a lot of like outside of the box thinking and taught me how to do my own independent research and just like learn new skills. And I think that problem solving aspect definitely helped me going into college because I feel like that's a lot of what engineering is, problem
Mhm.
solving and thinking outside the box. So I think it would be great if they could implement more things like that into the high school experience.
Yeah, because just for our listeners' backgrounds, I'm familiar with the Da Vinci program, so that's why I had to ask. My word of the night is distant. And what I'm hearing from both of you, whether it's being disengaged or the displacement, it's because there is this distance between what teachers in high school or secondary school think prepares you for college. And in some aspects, what college professors think will prepare you for the real world. And so is it this the more I lecture you and the more I fill your head with knowledge, the better prepared you're going to be? Or is it the more I allow you to grapple with open-ended challenges and problems that you need to figure out and solve and build skills while doing it? Is that a way to close that distance gap so that we don't have such a disengagement or displacement type feeling moving from secondary to college, from college to the real world? And how do we get there? And I know that because both of you are second year students, maybe things will start to shift a little bit more in your third year and in your fourth year, because when we work with professors, many of them say to us, well, maybe if they were fourth year students, they'd be ready for this, but they're just not ready for it yet. And then I share examples with them of kindergarten students solving open-ended challenges that it kind of blows their mind. If 5-year-olds can do it, I guarantee you your 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds can do it too.
Um, I just wanted to say with closing the gap, I do think that there is benefits from lecture. I think to understand the principles of everything is important, and then that's helpful to incorporate in your hands-on learning and problem solving.
Yeah, and many people listening might be really shocked to hear that my first master's degree, my thesis was about lecture in the classroom and the benefits of it.
Hmm.
But I also remember very specifically a professor in that graduate program lecturing us for an entire hour on why we should not talk at our students for more than 10 minutes at a time. And so there was a disconnect that was there. And so, Katie, when you talk about that flipped method, I do a lot of that in the work that I did when I taught in high school, and now that I teach in a grad program, and as Tim and I work with teachers, yes, we have to have those foundational pieces. But if we start with this open-ended challenge, then there's this reason behind why we need to learn some of those more basic pieces so that we can solve those problems.
Mhm. And what do you
I
think about this gap? Spriya, go ahead.
Yeah, I also definitely agree that um, sort of employing these more experiential opportunities for learning is beneficial to closing the gap. I can give an example. My freshman year, second semester, I was involved in this one credit class called Math Research Seminar. I am not a math major, but I was sort of interested in this class originally because one of my professors told me, so in this class, you're going to be given a problem that no one has found a solution to in the math world. And at first, I'm like, I'm just a first year student. How am I going to like even if like PhD level math experts aren't able to solve it, I don't think I can do it. Like, is this going to be too advanced for me? But after talking through it a little more, I decided to take it anyways. And it was one of the most like enjoyable classes that I've ever taken because
Mhm.
it was so open-ended. And with what Dr. Lar mentioned again, it really helped me to think, critically think, because number one, I was thinking of like creatively solving that problem. And I was working with my professor as well, not looking at her as someone who had a higher level of knowledge than me, but really sort of being immersed in an environment where it was like peer-to-peer connection, where the professor was also trying to figure out and solve this problem with me. And I had some other classmates as well. And so that really created a very enriching experience for me in terms of research. And it also helped me realize that research is a side that I really like doing, and also just overall development of my confidence as well.
Mhm.
And I agree that lectures are also important in terms of it being like a foundational piece. But with that, I think it's also important to realize how to structure the lectures in terms of being mindful of some of the cognitive aspects of attention and memory for students, and how you can make the best of both worlds with lectures and followed by or complemented by these experiential learning opportunities as well.
Yeah, and in that example that you shared, I think there's another angle on distant that I want to pick at a little bit. And that is actually the distance in relationships that teachers sometimes hold, right? And it seems like what you're describing from your more positive experiences is a, a teacher or a professor who was more willing to close some of that distance, right? Not hold their authority over you, not keep you like at a distance because you don't know enough, you're not ready. And I see you nodding, Priya, but or it's Priya, but I'm curious to what extent that resonates with you. That a big part of this is less about the teaching style or the learning style, and more just about is the teacher or professor willing to enter into a collaborative relationship with you on some of the learning that's going on? Thoughts about that? Does that resonate with either one of you in a way you'd like to share?
I'll say a lot of my professors here, I will say it is easier being at a smaller college.
Mhm.
York College, my class sizes are very similar to my high school size classes. So it's a very comfortable environment. And my professors are very open to having one-on-one conversations right after class, or I can just walk in their office if I have any questions. They're all very personable people, which makes it much easier here.
So that advantages the small class sizes and the more personal connection there. How about you, Spria?
I'll definitely have to agree with that. The fact that I also go to a school that's relatively smaller makes it easier for me because I'm now, as I'm heading on to my second year, I'm having like repeated professors and professors who know my name and who I know as well. So like every other class I take with them, it's just a opportunity for me to build that relationship and make it stronger and repeatedly like go to them for if I need any help. And I'm really glad that I have professors who I don't feel as much hesitance in seeking out for help, whether it be academic wise or like some of those bigger career related questions. I think mentorship overall as a theme is so important in college, and mentorship in terms of not just seeking that from faculty or professors or people who are like administrative or like your work boss, but even mentorship with other people like your classmates or just other situations overall where you're able to um, be a mentor, be a mentee, but also be a mentor as well.
Mhm.
So taking on both of that role, I think is super, super important. I can speak from my experience and has helped me a lot.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up because that's one of the things that we think is so powerful about community connected learning is that kids get to interact with other adults, right, in the process, and some of those turn out to be natural mentors for them. Um, but I like that we've arrived at a place where that connection, which is not a dis word necessarily, um, but that connection that you have can be a really important part to whether the learning is working for you or not, and where teachers are trying to hold a distance, as you just both described earlier, a little bit more strict in high school because they're wanting to prepare you to get ready for what they remember college being like, right? That creates a distance that maybe isn't as productive as it could be. Um, I also think um, related to the question of application, I, both of you have talked about, and Dana, feel free to jump in on this also, like how important it is that application is quickly connected to learning, either some lecture on concepts and principles and then immediate application, or some application to struggle and then some lecture that helps you resolve the struggle, right? Um, have you found that generally to be true in most of your learning experiences, that the learning and the application are quickly connected, or does it tend to be like we're going to learn this for a unit for a long period of time and you'll have a chance to do a project or some sort of application later? I'm curious what that experience has been like for both of you.
Yeah, I'd say it definitely depends on the class, but most times, let's say a lot of my classes I have labs with, so I'll be learning something in lecture the one day, and then we'll have a lab that actually applies it. So while I'm in lecture, I'm like, why am I learning this? Why is this important? And then the next day in my lab, I'm like, okay, I understand and
Uh-huh.
can apply it.
Cool. And how about you, Spria?
For me, I experienced this initially when I was taking, I believe it was a calculus class, and I was like, I see no application here. I do not know why I'm learning all of these like derivatives, and I'm sure Katie has taken more advanced math classes than me too. But initially, when I was taking that class, it was very humbling for me, and I was like, I don't see the point of this. How does this relate to I struggled a lot. But it was helpful for me. I think it was a semester after when I was taking a class called AI Fundamentals, and then it was I was able to see how those pieces of calculus that I learned that was like completely theoretical math mapped to how AI works.
Hmm.
And that was really cool for me because it's first like it validated me. I was like, I went through all of that, and it was difficult for me to see the application initially, but then now as I was approaching it from a different applied perspective, I felt really good about, like struggling through it and grinding through the process and being able to reach to that point. To now being able to also I've decided to go back to the foundation. So I think what helps my motivation personally is knowing about the applications first. So if I know that certain theoretical concepts applied in certain things, like examples that I see, like this AI model or some other like real life application, then it helps me see the impact and it helps me realize the importance of going back to that theory and learning the foundations. So it's been really helpful for me to know about the applied side of things first, or at least be a little bit like primed for it. So I would really appreciate if professors did this more often, even if they're in their theoretical classes, just mention some applications before just diving straight into theory, because I found that it can be hard and like I've gotten lost a lot of times when I don't really see the direct application.
No, and that's helpful. And what I'm hearing you say also is that as long as the application is tangible, it doesn't matter if it's immediate, right? It can happen a semester later, which is great. Katie, I saw you nodding a little bit at one point during Spriya's comments about application in engineering. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I was gonna say, honestly, during my high school experience, that's one of the things that made me like that drew me to engineering more so once they started explaining, oh, why are we solving these integrals and why are we doing all this stuff? And then it just made my brain spin and think of all the things that I could do with all this information that I learned.
Yeah, and I have to share that's my wife has said for years that if somebody had told her about the applications for physics first, she would have loved physics, right? She ended up becoming a philosopher, an ethicist instead, completely impractical, right, rather than applied. But I think we're sort of getting to a conclusion here about the importance um, of engaging application, right? And by I don't mean that it's engaging like it's entertaining, but just engaging the question of application, like making sure we connect to that as a way of preventing ourselves from feeling a little bit displaced. I want to go back to that displaced word because you two have been great to jump in today and participate in a very different headspace than what you're used to in um, uh, high school or in your college classes. And I'm just curious, how does it feel having been displaced from being a learner in a classroom to somebody talking about learning at kind of a meta level as we wrap up this conversation? Do you have any thoughts you want to share about that experience? And then Dana, I'll toss it to you for a final thought as well. Any final thoughts about what it's like to have been displaced out of a classroom and into a conversation about learning?
I think it's just eye-opening to hear from Spiria, about her experience and how different colleges do different things and how they think some things are more beneficial than others. And I don't think I've really taken much time to myself to think about whether my high school experience completely prepared me for college. I think in some ways it did, in some ways it didn't.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think this was just an eye-opening conversation for me.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And Spria, how about yourself?
Yeah, it's very interesting for me also to hear from Katie on like things that I can relate to and like things that college students are collectively going through together. I feel like these are sort of things that doesn't get talked about a lot at this level in the sense that you always have people like with your friends you're talking about like oh I'm struggling with this class that but you never really get to the point where you ask the question of okay why are we struggling like what's not working here what is there something what's going is it on the student side or is it on the whole system side or faculty side so it is also a great learning experience for me to hear all these different perspectives and especially also to hear about the high school experiences that Katie went through with the Da Vinci class because I come from a high school background that's a little different. That's probably a lot different from how education works here and but it's really cool to hear that and I mean education the entire reason why I'm here also in the States is because how much I value education and how well education is structured here. But also, there's always conversations about how can we make it better and how can we improve. And um, I'd like to thank you both
Hmm.
and all three of you for giving me the chance to be a part of this.
Yeah, Dana, some thoughts about the meta here as we wrap up the conversation. What does having learners who don't know each other reflecting on their own learning do?
Yeah, so I've been taking notes if you can see my pen.
Hmm.
So I think the conclusion that I've come to, or the reinforced conclusion, is that we need to listen to our learners. And the way to do that is to have our teachers, whether it's secondary or post-secondary or even primary teachers, you know, think about themselves as learners
Hmm.
and not necessarily as the know-all, be-all, end-all person in the room. And I think if teachers take that perspective as being co-learners, then that closes that gap, the distance between them in what is expected in secondary versus post-secondary versus the real world. And it eliminates the bulk of that disengagement or the displacement feelings that we have. And so I started thinking about this question of how can we create an environment in which our teachers are comfortable becoming learners alongside their students. And really, I think maybe one of the questions that remains for Tim and I to kind of grapple with too is, is that easier in higher ed because of those research-minded approaches that many professors have? And if that's the case, how do we translate that into the secondary world that we do a lot of work in that space? But ultimately, just trying to think about no matter whether you're teaching a kindergarten class or you're teaching doctoral students, how do we get those educators to feel more comfortable to become learners alongside their students, no matter what age they are?
That's a nice conclusion, Dana. And I just want to share with you, Spria and Katie, that I hope you'll stay connected as a result of this and bounce some ideas off. Um, Dana and I thought we were pretty hot stuff teachers before we met, and didn't actually know that we needed each other as thought partners. Even though we lived on opposite sides of the country, even though we taught in different learning environments, right? And it's one of the most amazing things about the age we live in that we can get together like this, make connections, that, as you said earlier in a comment, Spria, it's just sort of surprising how life takes funny twists and turns at times. And I hope this proves to be a fruitful twist and turn for both of you. Thanks for joining us this evening. And for those of you who've been watching, I hope you'll take to heart some of the things these students had to share with us this evening in terms of the distance that you keep in your classrooms. Have a good night, everyone.